I actually am more interested personally in whether this is also an occasion for us to take a step back and say that, you know what, whether they're doing it to Donald Trump or a political candidate or an ordinary citizen who's not running for office, is this the kind of thing a prosecutor should be doing in the first place? And is this the kind of thing the law should give prosecutors the latitude to do by being written as broadly as they are? To be able to use that statute from the Sarbanes-Oxley era and or otherwise a joinder to be able to go after somebody for a 20-year prison term. First of all, let's just take a look at the proportionality of what you just laid out. That document tampering charge allows for a double 20-year plus conviction versus engaging in what you would think about as, insurrection or whatever you want to talk about it, violent crime that could have a 10-year maximum attached to it. That itself seems backwards. And yet we have seen a proliferation of you'd know better about this than I do on the exact facts, but the proliferation of the criminal code that has allowed for the breadth of these statutes to really be defined by prosecutors who use them.
Yeah.
And it strikes me, and President Trump has said this several times at a high level, he says, they're not going after me, they're going after you, and I'm the only thing standing in their way. But I think there's a lot of truth to that, to say that even if it isn't a political candidate for office or for U.S. president, the use of a statute where, even if on appeal, numerous judges in the Second Circuit or the U.S. Supreme Court disagree on the nature of the actual crime, should this be the stuff that we ever allow somebody to be thrown in prison over in the first place? If judges themselves or legal scholars or law professors are left to debate what the actual underlying crime is, or whether that actual underlying alleged crime actually falls outside the four corners of a criminal statute.
Yeah, I think you got to break out two separate issues here. Should prosecutors be able to charge candidates, former presidents? Yeah, they should. I mean, nobody's above the law. If somebody's committed a serious crime and you got them dead to rights, and you got the evidence, you got the goods, and you do it lawfully, you do it constitutionally, nobody's above the law. The problem is, and this is really what you're putting your finger on, vague laws or the use of laws in new ways. And that's where you create the issues. We got to somehow put a stop to the use of criminal laws in new, novel ways, novel legal theories to achieve political ends. And I'll give you a suggestion for how it might be done if you want to know doctrinally. I can't answer all the great questions you're asking, but you've probably heard the word lenity.
Yep,
That's
the rule of lenity.
Rule of lenity. Criminal law doctrine says, you know what? As a general rule in criminal law, we are going to interpret the terms of a criminal statute narrowly, as narrowly as possible, not broadly, but narrowly. Guess what? That's not a constitutional doctrine. Judges are not required to interpret the terms of a criminal law narrowly, but they are allowed to do it, and that's a traditional common law canon of construction, the rule of lenity, and that's a matter of some discretion. And a doctrine could develop that said, look, if you've got a context where prosecutors from one party are going after people who, under circumstances that raise a suspicion that there could be political motivation behind it, that there could be an attempt to prosecute people because of their political views or because they are your opponents, even though that evidence doesn't rise to the level of proving a selective prosecution claim, so that you got to throw the whole thing out, even if it doesn't rise to the level of retaliating against somebody for their political views, so you got to throw the whole case out, maybe it rises high enough to say, look, we're going to have a special rule of lenity here, and we are not going to allow any kind of new expansive application of this criminal law.
So my only question is why, if we're talking about an expansion of the rule of lenity, and I'd love to talk about whether there is a constitutional hook for a sympathetic Supreme Court to import this into constitutional doctrine, but why limit that to the instance of politicized prosecutions? In a certain sense, I guess the case I'm interested in, I've had a long-standing interest in this, is for the listeners to understand, it is entirely possible for someone to be charged, let's, for the sake of discussion, make it a federal crime, with a federal crime, a violation of, it could be drug law, white-collar statute, whatever it is, and it makes its way through the courts, and it goes to the Supreme Court on appeal to say that is what this person did a violation of the law or not, right? And you see this context come up from time to time. you have novel, let's say you see it in the business context a lot, for example. And this is similar to the kind of white collar context. You could call this a white collar crime for Trump. Same category. Where the Supreme Court could come down 5-4 saying that it is indeed a crime. And you'd have 4 Supreme Court justices who would write eloquent dissents. Could each have 4 different individuals on the Supreme Court that dissent on whether or not the alleged defendant did actually violated the law. And because it was 4 rather than 5 who came down on that side, that person should still go to prison and would still go to prison.
Mm-hmm.
It strikes me as fundamentally unjust. And it comes up in the Trump context here, where law professors and judges, and this isn't going to be appealed through the Second Circuit, but if it was, they would probably find a Sixth Amendment violation on the notice grounds alone. But you could even say it for the predicate crime, not knowing what it is and objecting to the use of that predicate crime, where you're throwing somebody in prison where judges and legal scholars themselves disagree on whether or not the alleged act violated a law. It seems to me that whether or not you're a political victim of persecution or whether you're just an ordinary victim of prosecution, you in that instance should not be going to prison for an act that jurists themselves reasonably could not agree was a violation of the law or not.
Mm-hmm.